Richard Samuel Attenborough was born on the 29th of August 1923. In the intervening 90 years, he has made a name for himself as an actor, a producer, a director, and a patron of the arts. But perhaps nowhere has he made as long-lasting and wide-ranging an impact as in the city of Leicester, a city in which he grew up and was educated, and a city with whom he shares a wealth of memories.
The first time that I heard the name was at Wiggiston Boys' School, 1943.
The first time to see Lord Attenborough when I was just 22.
I first met Sir Richard, as he was then, in the late 80s.
We met first when in London, in a restaurant in London.
I first came to Leicester in 1992, 21 years ago, to run what was called the City Challenge Regeneration Programme in the West End. And that's when I first met Richard.
The first time I recall meeting Dickie Attenborough was shortly before I started my job as Vice-Chancellor.
Within a couple of weeks of arriving here, I got an invitation to go to his house for lunch.
I can't remember the year, but it happened like this.
Richard Attenborough's celebrated acting career began on stage, and he would appear in many shows at Leicester's Little Theatre prior to beginning his training at RADA.
He made his first film in which we served with Noel Coward, 42, and then quite a few films during the 40s, but of course it was a very difficult period because the war was still going on.
Leading 5 years later to his breakthrough part in Brighton Rock. I'd heard about the film version of Brighton Rock, and obviously it had this amazing reputation and Richard's performance in it particularly. But obviously, like sort of any teenager that's kind of obsessed with a particular novel, you kind of go into a film version with a certain amount of trepidation, thinking it can never be the story that you have in your head. And I remember seeing it for the first time and just being astonished at the way that Attenborough had captured the central character.
And clearly, you know, one homes in on movies that he's made, and he's always there. He's always, when he's acting in a movie, he's always very much on pace. And you feel you know a lot more about the individual who is there portrayed.
But this was only the beginning of his career in film as he moved increasingly towards producing and directing.
Astonishingly, I first saw Gandhi on an aeroplane, 5 miles high, above India, of all places.
Lord Attenborough is doing a film on Gandhi, and which way they introduced the planning of Lord Attenborough. I said, oh my God, he is so much into that film. And I said, I want to see that guy.
It began to roll as we joined Indian airspace to the west.
And I said, how I could get in to that area? Because that time I have only one jeans and shirt, looks like with big beard and, you know, beggar boy like.
And it ended as we left Indian airspace to the east.
You know, one boy always go with the tea and coffee, and at that time is a Coca-Cola, Thumbs Up, is Indian drinks, taking inside and outside. And I just say to that boy, I say, could you please give me a chance? I can take a tea and coffee to the whole unit. I don't mind. I can pay you. And that time I was only 5 rupees in my pocket. And he said, no, if you're going there, I'm sitting here. So that boy is giving me an opportunity. So then whole day I took the tea and coffee inside for the whole units.
And I was aware intensely of what that film said about the vast subcontinent beneath us and the humanity that it portrayed that was there below us, and all it said about the man that was Gandhi and the subcontinent that is India.
I'm just watching that guy. He's so powerful in the thought and precisely telling, very friendly manner.
I remember seeing Shadowlands for the first time in the cinema when I was about 17, and just becoming so emotional.
With something like Shadowlands, it seemed to me, for instance, he got right to the heart of human feelings and understood how people felt when they were under pressure, and he got that across.
Even though it was something I hadn't yet experienced, it kind of spoke to me on a kind of innate level, and I knew not only was I learning something more about sort of being a human being, but also it was the beginnings of really believing that I wanted to perform, and I wanted to write, and I wanted to direct films.
He had heroes, you know, Richard himself had heroes, and these were people who made a difference to the human condition. And I think that comes up so much through his work, that he was inspired about the deepest feelings of mankind, womankind at their best.
When I think I was 14 or 15, I saw Cry Freedom at my local cinema, and I grew up in quite a small town. And it was the first political film or piece of cinema that I'd ever seen.
When you look at Richard's films, particularly the ones that he's directed, the way in which he manages to somehow combine the cinematic sort of grandeur, but at the same time never forgetting about the human emotions, never forgetting about where the story actually lies.
You're trying to paint a picture about somebody which tells slightly more than a snapshot. And hence, at this time, there were all these films, and so we thought Gandhi hadn't long gone. And so we tried, in this case, to put a story together, a little bit, a visual story. And so it was a great pleasure and a privilege, really, but particularly for here, because I had my first ever exhibition in this place when I was a student in 1958-59. And so, you know, the Leicester connection is a long, long time.
Yet for all the undoubted successes of Richard Attenborough's professional career, it is only part of his story. We have countless examples of causes he has ceaselessly advanced, of institutions he has tirelessly supported. And nowhere is that more true than in the city of Leicester.
You don't usually find that people come back time and time again, that they are hugely committed to it, that they form a great bond with it. That's what Dickie Attenborough has done, because the reason that he grew up in Leicester was that his father was principal of University College, that subsequently became the University of Leicester.
There were quite a few children coming from Germany, Jewish children and other children coming from Germany on what was called Kindertransport. And that was in the days of 38 and 39. Amongst the very latter numbers that came were two girls, two Jewish girls, sisters, and accommodation was requested locally for them. The parents got the children together, got the three of the boys together and said, look, before we say we'll take these two sisters, are you agreeable to it? Because 3 becomes 5 and lots of things change. And they all agreed. And they became part of that family.
I remember the headmaster at sort of speech day, they say, the Attenborough brothers have just left. Richard has made a film. Now, this was wartime, you know, the Second World War.
Mrs. Attenborough was so kind to me. I was the same age as their sons, coming in age between Richard and David, who were away from home by then, and John was at Cambridge.
And for somebody to go and make a film, it was like unbelievable, sort of. This was, I mean, you couldn't believe that anybody could be so famous as to. And so they were held up as an icon, that everybody got to work very hard and try to achieve what Richard and David was doing.
The whole family have shown respect and an understanding that perhaps is a little extraordinary. Not out of the ordinary, but extraordinary.
He's very like his mother, with his empathy and his warmth and his friendship and his awareness of others. He's not at all big. And that touched me very much. It was like being at home with my own family.
So we arrived on the 3rd of April 1939 and we came to Leicester, Dr. and Mrs. Millard, who had no idea why we had come, but the Attenboroughs knew why we had to come out. The Leicester Jewish community were most unhelpful. On the first Rosh Hashanah, they told us to get out, stand in the back, because we hadn't paid for our seats. So we told Mrs. Attenborough what happened, and she said, "There's my dining room. You cook whatever you like, you invite whoever you want, and you have your festival in my house," which we did. This were the Attenboroughs.
I think we tend to forget how important he was in the redevelopment of large sections of Leicester through his chairmanship of Leicester City Challenge.
The main flagship area was Bede Island. It was scrapyards and pretty much a no-go area, which has now been transformed through the project into a combination of sort of residential, affordable housing, some business units, and of course Bede Park.
When we went to him and asked for his support, for his encouragement with that project, he readily agreed not just to give that support and that encouragement, but also to be the patron of the project.
He was certainly not just a name. And he spent more time than any of us realised. And he was very hands-on in that sense. And when he came on visits, he just inspired people.
He certainly wasn't only interested in the big ticket items, if you like. He was deeper than that, and realising that it comes together as a whole, where you're doing your physical regeneration, but if you haven't got sort of people at the heart of it, if you like, then it's likely to be less successful long term.
I shall never forget him coming January '98, because that was the day when he spent the whole day visiting projects in City Challenge. And the children, it was just like waving a magic wand. They just flocked to him, they responded to him. It was almost, as I say, like magic.
A lot of our students in the then adult education department were students with disability. A lot of them were doing art, and we had nowhere to accommodate them which was accessible. One Saturday morning that I heard a radio programme with Richard was talking about accessibility. And he said that he didn't think there was anywhere in the country which really offered true accessibility to people with disability. So I thought, well, if I got in now and wrote to him and said, at least in our minds, we had an idea. And because of that connection, because of his interest in disability and the arts, and because of his interest in the University of Leicester, he wrote back and said, well, let's meet.
He really spearheaded the fundraising campaign because he'd got this absolute passion around making the arts accessible to all, especially those with a disability.
We were working with the administration of the university, who was in favour of what was happening, but they didn't do things this way because Richard came to all the meetings. Richard would meet us, who were mere lecturers. We were not even heads of department. And we would meet him ahead of time for breakfast somewhere. And we'd chat with him at length. And he would say to the Vice-Chancellor, "Don't you think it would be absolutely marvellous if we did this and this and this, which we'd been talking about in the morning? And how could you refuse him?"
He arranged for Princess Diana to open the centre in 1997, and I think their connection came across because he had helped her with voice coaching and presentation skills.
It was incredible because we hadn't ever gone through this thing where you had a celebrity and royalty. We've had one royal visit, one or two since, and you'll get walls painted that never get painted when people like that come, and everything gets tidied up. And we had the story, which you probably heard of, the red helicopter coming and landing on the field across from there. Richard goes across the lawn and meets Diana.
Richard came over, brought her over, and he said, "Darling, I want you to meet two of my friends."
It was such a big production, even though this is a very tiny place, it was such a symbolic sense of success.
And he brought her over to me, and he said, I want you to meet this dear friend. And Diana said, yes, I know, I saw you kissing her.
And that's very hard to forget. It's comic and tragic and everything else.
And I think this was, if I'm not mistaken, only a short few weeks before she was killed, before she died.
Things have changed a lot. The idea that there should be accessibility for everybody is now, I think, taken for granted.
He was really open to a new way of thinking around access, and we talk very much about making this place inclusive rather than an exclusive place for disabled people.
There has been a sea change in educational ideas about continuing education.
Access not being about ramps and lifts anymore, but it being about philosophy and ethos.
I think Richard, to a large part, was responsible for pushing for those changes to happen in Leicester.
The one memorable part in my life is after that whole journey of time, 18 years after. That time I was working with BBC Radio Leicester. They invited Lord Attenborough for breakfast interview and then after. And my editor, Liam McCarthy, has told me that, Deepak, you are a tea boy. You serve a tea. And it was tear in my eyes. I could not believe in my mind. And I explained, I'm Deepak Joshi. I was a tea boy in your Gandhi film. And I met you a few times. The thing is that he's meeting so many people, in so busy world. But rather than asking me, how are you? He said, how's your guru, Govind Nilani? I said, you asking about my guru? He said, yes, what he is doing now? Amazed. Not a single person in the world, asking about when I was 21 years old and asking about my guru, Phenomenal, man. Sorry.
He had this wonderful gift of communicating with people on a one-to-one basis. They really mattered to him. And that is my abiding memory of Richard.
All of the values that Richard Attenborough has represented in his films, in his work, in his life, in his personal humanity and connection with people are reflected in the diversity of Leicester and the ways in which we as a city relate to each other as communities and as individuals.
He turned into something more than an actor or a director. He became an image which represents all sorts of things. He was president of everything and chairman of everything, and he did do it genuinely. And I think here the legacy has continued.
With Leicester bidding to be the city of culture, I dare say the connections with Lord Attenborough will be made very frequently.
There's a statement from Richard Attenborough saying how important it is for the city and how he is absolutely firmly behind the bid. That's good for people to know, and it's very encouraging. And I think it's very true to character.
If there's a point of inspiration that I think that we can all cling on to, is that nothing is beyond our grasp if we're willing to persevere and to put all of ourselves into it and pull all of our energies, but also to bring other people around, to inspire other people to work towards the same goal. And if I can sort of hold on to a fraction of that, then I'll feel like I'm moving forward in the right direction. And I have Richard Attenborough to thank for that. He is genuinely one of the greatest and most magnanimous talents that this country has produced.
Hi Dickie, or as Brian would say, Bunter. You know, hope you're okay. Thinking of you, talking about you. Had a wonderful, wonderful friendship, and have a great birthday. I wish you well.
Dear Richard, I remember with enormous gratitude everything you did for us at the Richard Attenborough Centre. And I'm sending you my very best love on your birthday.
Richard, Lord Attenborough, I want to wish you, on my own behalf and on behalf of all of those in Leicester who owe you so much, a very happy birthday and many, many happy returns.
Hello, I'm Andy Morley. I was the financial director of Leicester City Challenge, and I met you when you came to review the projects that we'd achieved in City Challenge towards the end of 1997. And I'd like to wish you a very, very happy 90th birthday.
Lord Attenborough, you have been an enormous inspiration to me. So really, I would like to say, on behalf of myself and the countless people that you've inspired in the arts and in so many other spheres of life, I'd just like to wish you a very happy birthday, and I hope that you enjoy the day with your family, and thank you.
Well, it's great to be here, Dickie, in order to say happy birthday. All of us in Leicester miss seeing you, but we always know that you're rooting for us. We hope you have an absolutely terrific birthday and a fantastic time with your family and your friends. So a very happy birthday from me in particular, and thank you very much for all your help and support.
Happy birthday, Richard. We really miss you, and I hope you and Sheila are well. I can't believe you are 90 and probably still more active than I am, and I hope you have a great day and love you lots. Bye-bye.
Richard, you and I love the occasional glass, perhaps more than the occasional glass, though I don't know. And one of the favourites that Richard has is for Corton. So, Richard, I'm hoping that you will receive, with my love and best wishes, darling, because he calls everybody darling because he can't remember the name, you will receive, with my love and best wishes for a 90th birthday, this bottle of Corton.
An absolute joy and privilege, Richard, to wish you a very happy birthday. I can't tell you how much I value the privilege of having known you and worked with you, and how you inspired me. And we all love you in Leicester, and Sheila. You've made a fantastic contribution to the city. I just wish I could give you a big hug and say, happy, happy birthday, Dickie. God bless you.
I don't know if it's a bit ironic to say happy birthday, but I just want to thank him for his kindness and his generosity and his friendship.
Richard, it would be wonderful to see you again. We had the most extraordinarily big time of our lives working with you. We always had great affection for you, and we're absolutely delighted that the Richard Attenborough Centre still exists. And in fact, it looks like there's going to be an addition which maybe will mean that it will survive a very long time, and we hope the message of it will as well. We wish you well, we think of you fondly, and thank you very much for all you've done.
The prayer is from Gandhi that obviously we are so privileged to sing again after I sing during the Gandhi's location in Ahmedabad. So, Vaishnava Jana to tenere kaiye je pid parai jane re. Wishing you a very, very happy birthday. Yeah, from bottom of my heart. Tum jiyo hajaro saal, saal ke din ho 50,000. God bless you. Salute.